To the Point with your host, News Channel 5's Kelly Dunn.
The legislative session is over. Who won? Who lost? Who's up? Who's down? And what can we expect next? That's our topic today. Good morning and welcome to the Point. To answer those questions and more, we have two state representatives from our area, Republican Gayle Harrell from Stewart and Democrat Steve Perman from Boca Raton. And thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
We are delighted to be here.
Well, we appreciate your time. So let's get to the point. For Floridians, was this a good legislative session or a bad one? Representative Harrell, will begin with you.
Well, I would say all things considered, given the status of the economy, given what is happening nationally, and given the economic situation that individuals find themselves in, I think all things told, it was a good session. It's about the best we could accomplish, given all the dynamics going on and the significant deficit that we had.
And as a Democrat, would you have a significantly different view?
Well, obviously, there's only so many ways you can cut up the pie. We started out the session with the deficit, as my colleague mentioned, and all over the country, there are these challenges being felt. There are economic challenges that are national and ones that are local. But at the end of the day, rather than getting involved in like a whole partisan issue about who did feel good for, who didn't it. Really, all over the country, it's a two-party system, and in certain areas, one party has the majority and gets to advance their agenda, and the other party gets to do so less of the time. But at the end of the session, I know I was able to get some legislative initiatives through that I'm very proud of, and hopefully as the continuation in the next session, we'll be able to do more.
And we'll talk about those that you both were able to get through during the session. The polls done, though, after the sessions showed that the approval ratings for Governor Scott were falling, and with less than 30% saying that they approve the job that he's doing, Does that concern you as a fellow Republican with a Republican leader of the state?
Well, I think Governor Scott, of course, is new on the job. He's been in the job, what, 5-6 months, less than 6 months. And never having served in government previously, I think there's definitely a learning curve. And it has taken him some time to understand the process. And so all in all, I think at the end of the day, he was moving in the right direction. Yes, there's criticism. There's criticism everywhere. But I have to say that, as things move forward, I think we'll see his leadership move forward. I think he's learning a lot along the way. And the legislature is there to enact laws. Of course, he has a leadership role to play, but the legislature plays a significant role as well.
Many state employees are angry right now that they are now being required to pay 3% into their salary into their retirement fund, into their pension. The Teachers Association, in fact, is suing the governor. The teachers say the pay cuts are wrong. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, the pension fund is one of the most solvent of any of the 50 states, and while it makes sense to try to keep that, financially sound, I know that many people are looking at this as basically a 3% income tax. They're feeling that this is money that's first of all anti-stimulatory, money that isn't being spent in communities as part of salary, but instead being invested into pension. And because many of the state employees, including the teachers, were made promises that instead of raises along the way, there would be certain funding to pension. Now that many of these employees are far behind their counterparts in other states, they're forced to take another hit and actually contribute more out of their paycheck.
And that's what I heard Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw speak recently, and he said the same thing. We were promised that by putting on a bulletproof vest and going out and putting your life on the line while defending the citizens of the area, that was the promise, that, okay, you may not make a lot of money now, but we're going to fund a pension for you and we're going to take care of you. So they say the state has broken the promise.
Well, I can't speak to the lawsuit, first of all, because it's ongoing litigation, so I don't really want to address the lawsuit per se. What I can talk about is the policy. And I think we need to make sure that we have a pension fund that is adequately funded, that we have the wherewithal to make sure that the benefits are there when our public servants retire. I'm a former teacher. I want to make sure that our teachers have their retirement when they are ready for it, and also our law enforcement. I think they are a critical part, and we want to make sure that they are there. I think we're the only state in the union that really has individuals have not participated in helping to fund their retirement system. So we need to make sure that we have the resources and that they are there when the individuals retire.
You mentioned your past life as an educator, and there were some big changes in the education field, the new law changing the way teachers are evaluated and how they're paid. What are you hearing from your constituents, not just teachers, but the people in your, parents, other people that are affected certainly by the education system?
Well, I think there's nothing more important than good teachers in the classroom. I think that's the key component that makes the difference for the student. Teachers are the essential element, and we want the very best and the very brightest in our classrooms. So I think we have been on a march over the last 10, 12 years to really improve our school system and our school districts. And I think the accountability that's been put in place over the years is now starting to show. And we are really seeing that rising student achievement. We see graduations increased by 22% over what they were in 1992, 93. We see major increases. So when I talk to parents, they are seeing those changes, and there's positive. Certainly there's some negative on FCATs, and people get real upset about testing and all that. But when we see these improvements coming down the pike, I think most parents are seeing those advances and are positive about them.
What do you think, Representative Perman? Do you think that we are doing enough when it comes to education in our state?
I might have a slightly different take on it than my colleague. When you have a situation where you're trying to get the best and brightest teachers to come and work and educate our students in Florida, and there is a mandate, really a constitutional one, to provide a high-quality public education for students, it almost begs the question, with diminishing not only the salary, but even making it a more difficult criteria for teachers to keep their jobs from year to year. There's no more extended contracts or tenure. It begs the question, why would great teachers want to stay in Florida?
Well, and a lot of people say, why would great companies want to come to Florida when our school system does not rank as high as many around the country? And in fact, I think I heard the figure the other day that Florida teachers were, ranked in the 30s among pay. Now, with this 3% hit, because they're paying into the pension, it knocks them down to like about 47th in the nation. What do you say to that?
Well, I think we want to keep our very brightest and best, and that's where we're going with merit pay. And I think that we're going to continue on this road of reforming education and implementing a merit pay system where you actually are rewarding those good teachers and making sure that they stay in our system. And, most private sector jobs don't have guaranteed contracts. I don't think a guaranteed contract is in the best interests of students. I think we want teachers who are there because they love teaching. That's the best teacher out there. And a teacher who is rewarded for their excellence, that makes the difference in education.
Well, I feel compelled to point out that the merit pay program is not funded, and there's no real mechanism for increasing the money, at least in the current budget that's been prepared. I also believe that the methods of evaluating the teacher's performance based on standardized tests and things like that, there are many factors that are outside of the teacher's direct control than simply, the student's performance on the test. Did that student have breakfast that morning? Are there problems at home that might distract that student from being as clear as possible to think during the testing period? And beyond all of that, when it comes down to it, yes, I agree with my colleague. Teaching is indeed a calling. People are drawn to it and want to do it, but they also want to have job security. I mean, during the actual debate process on the floor in the House, certain suggestions were made by teachers in the minority caucus. For example, a teacher can perform superiorly in every way that they're being measured and still be dismissed, still be terminated, and not be told why. And the question was raised, why not have a principal, a school board member, a superintendent explain to a good teacher why you're losing your job? And that input wasn't accepted in the debate process of the bill. So again, there wasn't as much give and take on the way this bill was formed as perhaps some people would have liked. And as a last comment on that, my mailbox was filled with individuals, teachers, that identify themselves as conservative, as Republican conservatives, who really felt that the budgetary challenges were sort of dumped on their backs, and they were disappointed in the way that it was handled.
I have a lot to say on the whole subject, but going back to really getting the very brightest and best teacher in the classroom, I think the merit pay system that we are establishing, and yes, it was not funded this year because it's in the planning phases. This whole program's not going to be implemented until 2014. And the teachers are going to have a tremendous opportunity to have impact in how that evaluation takes place. A child is going to be evaluated not strictly on a grade, an FCAT. The teacher's not going to be held responsible for that particular grade. What they're going to be responsible for, 50% of their evaluation will be included in learning gains. So not whether the student had a bad breakfast that morning, but what the learning gains are that that student has experienced. You know, you may have someone in 5th grade who is there, who's 4 years behind. If you bring that student up to 3rd grade, you've made tremendous learning gains. And it's a variety of things, including second language, including a whole variety of things that goes into that evaluation.
We should do a whole show on just
education. We could do a whole show on this.
And bring in some teachers that would actually be able to speak to the people that are representing them up in Tallahassee.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Mr. Perman and Gayle Harrell, for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Good luck when you head back up to Tallahassee.
Thank you.
Our roundtable's coming up next. There are some political shakeups. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. Time now for our roundtable, and joining me today, Brian Crowley, author of CrowleyPoliticalReport.com, and Tony Doris, a political editor for the Palm Beach Post. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. We ended up talking a lot about education with the state representatives that were our guests. And they did have a Republican and Democratic view. Anything else stand out, Brian, in your mind?
Well, education is going to be a hot-button issue for the next year or two, I think. You know, the Palm Beach County and the rest of the school districts are going to face even bigger budget cuts in the 2013 school cycle, and that budget they'll start working on that budget early next year. In Palm Beach County, they're looking at a deficit of over $50 million and perhaps much higher, depending on how property values go. As we know, last week, the school district suggested a $500 raise for teachers. And even that creates some animosity within the school systems. In Palm Beach County, teachers are getting raises, but other folks in the system aren't getting raises. So that creates a little animosity, and that makes for interesting politics in the education. It's going to continue to be a complicated and a hot-button issue as long as you have a governor or legislature that wants to cut money and not give more to education.
Sacrifices for everybody. Sometimes it's just about a matter of the way that it's done, too. I mean, the governor was saying we want 5% off the top out of the teachers, and the teachers were saying nothing. Maybe if it had been negotiated instead of imposed on the teachers, it would have gone a little more smoothly. But clearly there's a reason for the governor to want to keep the budget tight, but the teachers also to be surprised by a 3% off the top cut, or at least going to their pension and not being deposited in their accounts. There's a reason for them to be annoyed, sure.
Well, one thing you find consistently in the comments in the Palm Beach Post as they report on these stories is that there's very little public sympathy for the teachers on these raises. I mean, most of the comments are, I haven't had a raise in X number of years. I don't know what you're complaining about. If you don't want to be a teacher, don't be a teacher. Go do something else. I mean, there's very little public support.
And the teachers would argue that this wasn't a raise, that this was money cut that they were already getting.
Right.
Absolutely. But politically, as you look at it, the public support for the teachers right now isn't there. And the teachers unions, both statewide and locally, and in the Treasure Coast, you know, they really need to start sitting down and figuring out what they're going to do politically. The fact of the matter is that a lot of these younger teachers especially, they don't vote. They don't have a lot of impact on some of these elections. You know, if you want to have some skin in the game, you've got to vote.
Let's talk about the South Florida Tea Party, the group that Donald Trump spoke to in Boca Raton back in April. And there's been a split within that party. Is this just normal growing pains? What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's always been a problem with the future of the Tea Party. I mean, you know, it got started as this grassroots organization that sort of sprung up on its own with a little help from some insiders here and there, especially coming out of Texas with Dick Armey and his group. But it's hard to have an organization stay intact when it doesn't have a leader. This organization, you know, there are dozens of Tea Party groups in Florida.
Right.
You know, there's a handful of folks that call themselves Tea Party, 912, Patriots, all these various groups around the state. But there's no one person that they congeal around. And now you start getting a little infighting among the groups, as we've seen locally.
It sounded like a matter of personalities more than anything else in this case. The leader of the Tea Party of South Florida, was it, dared to oppose Representative Ryan's Medicare plan. The other one wanted to split off and do things a little bit more tactfully, a little bit her way. Well, all you can say is tea parties are supposed to be intimate affairs, so if you break one into two, you have two little intimate tea parties.
I would think they would all kind of join together. One big tea party.
Well,
like
no one has tried to take on that statewide leadership role. Each of the little Tea Parties, you know, whoever formed that one wants to be in charge of that one, and then of course when you get doctrinaire and you have a split on the Ryan issue on Medicare, then that causes problems. And it's going to be interesting over the next 18 months to see whether or not they can hold the Tea Party together. I mean, I think John Huntsman, who was in Florida last week, he's looking at trying to win the GOP nomination without counting on folks like the Tea Party. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays for him in Florida.
Certainly will. Well, a South Florida congressman is in the news, and not in a good way. We'll have that coming up next. South Florida Congressman Alcee Hastings is in the news. The Democrat who represents part of our viewing area is reportedly under investigation by a congressional ethics panel. He is accused of sexually harassing a female former aide. A lawsuit has been filed against him. Hastings is denying the accusation, so we're going to have to see how these details play out in court. But is this anywhere along the lines of the, Anthony Weiner scandal?
So far from what we know, no. I mean, the woman herself, she's a Republican, and she's made some accusations of what sounds largely like boorish behavior. I mean, there's a little problem with the...
We haven't seen the details yet, so we don't know.
From what we know in her lawsuit, it appears that it's largely boorish behavior. It certainly could rise to a higher level, but I think at this point, sexual harassment is an all-encompassing term that sometimes is really severe and at other times is less. And we don't know where it is on the scale yet, but at this point, the accusation, which is all it is, we got a he said, she said at this point, seems to be on the lower end of the scale.
Easy to accuse and easy and hard to prove, and that's good and that's bad. We don't know which way it'll go.
All right, well, there's a shakeup in the staff of Governor Rick Scott. He named his chief of staff, Mike Prendergast, to the post. He's only been governor for 6 months. Is it a little early to be making a change at such a high level?
Well, it's one of two major changes he made last week. In addition to removing his chief of staff, who's going over to be in charge of the Department of Veterans Affairs at a hefty $150,000 a year salary, so he'll be fined. Also, one of his top advisors is leaving the administration. And I suspect we're going to see more changes. He has had a very rocky communications effort. The St. Petersburg Times last week did a whole series of profiles of senior staff of Governor Scott, and it's a very, very good series and well worth reading. And Brian Burgess, who is his communications director, has been shall we say, one of the most aggressive in attacking the press, and I don't think he's done his boss any favors. And there are some people who speculate that Brian Burgess might not be long for the administration.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, yes, after 6 months, when you're down to 29% in the popularity polls, you'd almost have to criticize him if he didn't make some changes. But also, there are some blind spots here, some public relations blind spots. This week, last week, the governor came to Palm Beach County to celebrate signing the bill, and he came just to the place where the bill would have its hardest impact, right in front of dozens of workers who could lose their jobs. So you would think someone who was public relations savvy might not want to put that in those workers' faces. As Kirk Fordham with the Everglades Foundation, who I've done some work with, pointed out last week, he flies in his private jet to his own personal jet. Yeah, his own personal jet. He lands in his own personal jet so he can announce, these budget cuts in front of the Water Management District. They're going to result in many people losing their jobs. It may be the right thing to do.
Right.
But the tone that he sets is, I think, part of the reason why, as Tony points out, he's 29% in the approval ratings among Florida citizens.
All right, back to wrap it up on To the Point right after this. have time for some brief closing comments. Tony Dorse, we'll begin with you.
I would say Florida voters right now can be pretty comfortable. They're getting what they voted for. They're getting less regulation on the environment, on corporations, and they're getting a lot of pain on the public services that they like that are no longer there. So if they're unhappy right now, and popularity ratings suggest that they are, then they have themselves to blame.
Brian?
Well, this week, we have the governor is going into the lion's den. He's going to meet with the Florida Society of Newspaper Editors, a group that has not always been in love with this governor, and he hasn't been in love with them. So it should be an interesting encounter.
Yeah, he really didn't meet with that many.
No, he has not.
Leading up to getting into office.
So now he's going to meet them all at once in St. Petersburg.
This should be interesting. We'll have more to talk about next Sunday, that's for sure. Thank you very much, Tony Dorse and Brian Crowley, for joining us today. We appreciate it, and thank you for spending time with us on To The Point. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.